Mastering a musical instrument is no small feat. It will take years and years and tens of thousands of hours to get to the top, no matter who you are. But the best musicians amongst us usually start very young, have supportive parents, great teachers, good health, and a long list of other advantages that makes this grueling process a little bit easier on them. But what if you started behind the 8 ball in almost all of these categories? What would you be willing to do to catch up to everyone else around you? How far would you go to close the gap? Robert Schumann was born in Saxony, which is a modern-day state of Germany, in 1810 to a family of 5 children. Between the ages of 3 and 5, he was intermittently taken in and out of foster care due to his mother contracting typhus. At the age of 7, he began to study piano with his local organist, and his talent was recognized by his teachers. But even at the age of 7, he was already very far behind somebody like Mozart, who had been born into a family with one of the best music teachers in Europe and began training him before he could even walk. But it was clear that Schumann, even from this early age, was dedicated to improving his piano playing and his musicianship. His father, August, who was not very musical himself, encouraged Schumann's musical endeavors throughout his childhood, buying him a piano and arranging for him to attend concerts. But after his father's death in 1826, Schumann's mother pressured him to stray away from music and attend law school instead. Reluctantly, Schumann agreed, but it was clear that he had very little interest in law. According to his roommate, Schumann never stepped foot in a lecture hall. His calling for music drove him to begin studying with the leading piano teacher in his area, Friedrich Wieck, I think that's right, who promised Schumann that with hard work and diligent study, he would make him a top pianist in the next 3 years. And this statement right here would be the downfall of his piano career. He left his current university to attend another that was less strict before eventually leaving altogether to pursue music full-time. After leaving law school, Schumann was just as dedicated to his craft as a Mozart or a Mendelssohn. But the objective reality was that at this point in his life, around the age of 20, he was already very far behind the other greats, and he would need to go to some extreme lengths to catch up. And it's pretty clear that both he and the people around him knew this. Needless to say, he was under an incredible amount of pressure at this time, not only from his teacher and his own expectations with this 3-year time limit, but also from his mother. His mother was not pleased with his decision to leave his study of law. His father had left him an inheritance that she was in control of, and she was not going to release this money to him unless he had completed a 3-year study at a university. A compromise was made between Schumann and his mother that he would have a 6-month trial with this teacher, and at the end of this 6 months, an assessment would be made about his future in music. He needed to make as much progress as he could, as fast as he could, which is a feeling I'm sure most musicians are familiar with during their college years. Not to mention that during the first few months of his study, he was living in his teacher's home, and in that same house was a young piano prodigy, Clara Wieck, who would later become his wife, Clara Schumann. Clara, who was only 11, was well on her way to becoming a virtuoso, and had already far surpassed Schumann in terms of piano playing ability. Schumann, I'm sure, was not pleased with the fact that a child half his age was so much further advanced than he was. So he had the pressure of his own expectations, the pressure of a late start, the pressure of his teacher, the pressure of his mother, and the pressure of a child prodigy sleeping in the next room. This would certainly be enough to drive me insane. So what did he do about it? Well, he started practicing like a madman. During his first month of study with Wieck, he was practicing 6 to 7 hours a day. Here's an example of his daunting routine. 2 hours of finger exercises, toccata 10 times, finger exercises 6 times, variations 20 times myself, and I still didn't work out the Alexander variations in the evening. But even with this incredible load, he wasn't making progress fast enough. He was noticing that his teacher was much more interested in developing the skills of his prodigy daughter instead of him. During a period of about 7 months, Wieck and Clara left for a concert tour, and Schumann was left to his own devices. And this is where the real damage was done. In 1830, Schumann began writing about pains in his 4th finger on his right hand. It came to such a point that whenever I had to move my 4th finger, my whole body would twist convulsively. And after 6 minutes of finger exercise, I felt the most interminable pain in my arm. In short, a complete breakdown. This should have been a very clear warning sign, but unfortunately Schumann ignored it. He just kept pushing harder and harder. The human body is capable of crazy adaptations. When somebody lifts weights for long enough, they gain muscle. And when someone plays an instrument for long enough, their hands can actually change shape. Here's my hands. My left pinky can reach further than my right because of how often this is required on the bass. However, this process happens very slowly over a very long period of time. If you try to force it, you'll hurt yourself. So in 1831, Schumann got a hold of a few pseudo-torture devices that would help him achieve his goals. These devices stretch one finger towards the back of the hand to an extreme degree while allowing the other fingers to be used. And it seems as though that he would actually practice the piano this way. The logic was that holding the one finger back and having the other fingers continue to play would break them from their dependence on each other, while while at the same time the stretch would eventually allow him to reach further on the keyboard. It's a little unclear how much he used these devices and how much pain they caused him. But by the end of the next year, he wrote in his diary that the third and fourth fingers on his right hands were completely stiff and he was unable to use them. It seems as though the use of these devices partially paralyzed his fingers, making it impossible to play up to the level he was aspiring to. From 1832 to 1833, he tried to heal his injuries through a variety of methods that were all expensive and unsuccessful. This included rest, diet, electrotherapy, and probably grossest of all, animal baths, which was immersing his hand into a freshly slaughtered animal until the warmth subsided. It was also noted that a Leipzig doctor, Dr. Franz Hartmann, may have prescribed him arsenic to try and treat his issues. Going to the doctors in the 1800s must have been terrifying. You go there complaining of hand pain and leave with arsenic poisoning. And as you might have guessed, none of these treatments worked. In 1833, Schumann wrote to his mother that he had given up his pursuits of being a pianist to instead pursue compositions. And obviously he went on to become a very prolific composer, which is why we know his name today. But did this actually happen? Were these machines the real reason he had to give up his piano career? Well, to be honest, this is very uncertain. Schumann really did have these machines, and he really did have paralysis of his fingers. But was one the sole cause of the other? To this day, many musicians hurt themselves without the aid of medical torture devices. Repetitive use injury, especially in string players and pianists, is still a fear that we all face. And based off the amount of practice he was doing and the amount of strain he was putting on himself, it is very possible that he had already done some serious damage to his hands before he had ever touched one of those machines. And maybe they just exacerbated the problem. Schumann himself mentioned in his diary in 1831 that he attributed his hand weakness to excessive practicing at that time. But outside of his piano frustrations, there could have been several other causes. Schumann had a lot of problems, both physical and mental. There is strong evidence to suggest that he had contracted syphilis before the time he started having issues with his fingers, which, if you didn't know, is a sexually transmitted disease that had a knack for killing composers at the time. He wrote about this in his diary in pretty graphic detail about a wound he found on his fun stick after having an encounter with a young lady. And for syphilis, he was treated with mercury. Mercury was a common treatment for the disease at the time, but ingesting mercury will lead to heavy metal poisoning, and one of the symptoms of this can be paralysis of the fingers. Schumann also suffered from other severe health problems throughout his life that could have been linked back to mercury poisoning, such as depressive episodes, vertigo, tinnitus, auditory hallucinations, and even psychosis. Some believe that if he was alive today, he'd be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. But either way, his life ended rather tragically. He made an attempt on his own life in 1854 by throwing himself into the Rhine River. He survived this attempt, but then went on to spend his last 2 years in an insane asylum before dying at the age of 46. So it's hard to know if those devices were the real cause of the paralysis in his fingers. I think based off the evidence, it was probably a combination of many things, but I'd be willing to bet that they didn't help. The lesson here is that, unfortunately, there are no shortcuts, and devices like these, though not as scary looking as they used to be, still exist in the wild today. Don't use them. Also, avoid drinking mercury to cure your STDs. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, and check out my Patreon.